Mr. Thompson here. We're looking at U.S. History Standard 6, analyze the challenges faced by the first 5 presidents and how they responded. More specifically, we're looking at Part B of that standard, explain the presidency of John Adams, including the Sedition Act and its influence on the election of 1800. Washington's voluntary retirement after serving 2 terms as president left the nation divided on, well, who should take Washington's place? Who should be the next president to step up? The election of 1796 had John Adams, a Federalist, and Thomas Jefferson, a Democratic Republican, opposed to one another, running against each other. And these political parties that Washington warned against, Washington was like, hey, political parties are no good. They were really driving this election. Again, you had the Democratic Republicans supporting Thomas Jefferson. Then you had the Federalists supporting John Adams. The election was very close, so this showed, again, how opposed, how divided, how important it was to these different groups to support the candidate that aligned with them, because the margin of victory for John Adams in the Electoral College was 71 to 68. So Adams narrowly beat Thomas Jefferson in the election. However, the way the Constitution set up the Electoral College, the election was that the majority vote person in the Electoral College gets to be president, and then the second most votes gets to be the vice president. So you had Adams as the president, and then you had Thomas Jefferson as his vice president. However, this presented problems. This became very apparent that it would be an issue soon following the election. Adams ended up serving just 1 term as president, and while in office, he faced significant challenges. Entering the presidency, John Adams had an impressive record in government experience. He supported the Patriot cause in Boston leading up to the Revolution. He was a part of the Committee of Five in drafting the Declaration of Independence. During the Revolutionary War, he worked in Europe to secure alliances. He also helped negotiate the Treaty of Paris of 1783, ending the Revolutionary War, and stayed in Europe to help secure some trade deals for the U.S. After the new Constitution was ratified, John Adams was elected to serve as the country's first vice president under George Washington. Given all this political and international experience, of course, John Adams was well qualified to serve as president. Like Washington, John Adams set precedents that influenced future presidents as well as the course of American history. However, his administration was plagued with conflict by France and Great Britain. The financial difficulties and international conflicts led Democratic Republicans, including Vice President Thomas Jefferson, to criticize Adams. To overcome Democratic Republican opposition, the Federalist-controlled Congress and the Federalist President passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. These laws increased citizenship requirements. For example, it increased the naturalization process from 5 to 14 years. This was significant so that the Democratic Republican Party couldn't gain the immigrant population's support. The law also attempted to stop criticism of Federalists by limiting free speech and press rights. The alien part of the policy gave the executive branch the power to deport immigrant aliens subjectively deemed as dangerous. The sedition part of the policy essentially made it a crime for U.S. citizens to hinder or intervene against the U.S. government. Of greater impact in that policy was it made it a crime for anyone to write or publish or speak out badly against the government or an elected official. Democratic Republicans, with their propaganda filled newspapers and pamphlets, were the targets of these laws. Thomas Jefferson and Democratic Republican James Madison reacted to the Alien and Sedition Acts. They argued in the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions that states could oppose and not enforce federal laws that the states disagreed with. They argued that the Alien and Sedition Acts violated constitutional rights. Virginia and Kentucky claimed that the Constitution itself was an agreement among the states, and therefore states could question whether or not a law at the national level had overstepped its boundaries. This was the beginning of the states' rights concept. The country's growing economic problems, increasing taxes, and the unpopular Alien and Sedition Acts hurt Adams' chances of re-election in 1800. The Federalists portrayed the Democratic Republicans as too sympathetic to the French Revolution, and with the Democratic Republicans in power, the U.S. would be dragged into another war. The Democratic Republicans emphasized the danger to civil liberties with Federalists in charge as Adams secured more power at the national level. The campaign was very heated, and not even the Federalist Party was united. Hamilton's followers questioned Adams' resolve against France, and the Federalist Party was split. The results of the election of 1800 gave power in the executive branch and the legislative branch to the Democratic Republican Party. However, there was a snag in the Electoral College process. Thomas Jefferson tied with his Democratic Republican partner, Aaron Burr. Each man had acquired 73 electoral votes, thus putting the election in the House of Representatives. This was the procedure outlined in the Constitution if there was a tie in the Electoral College. Now, the House of Representatives was controlled by the Federalists, who now had the responsibility of deciding the election. Now, they had a choice to make between two Democratic Republicans, Thomas Jefferson or Aaron Burr. Alexander Hamilton was still a very influential Federalist, and when the House of Representatives still couldn't secure a decisive vote after 35 ballots, they turned to him for direction. Even though both choices were between two Democratic Republican candidates, Jefferson or Burr, Hamilton really preferred Jefferson over Burr because he knew Burr from New York and they really didn't like each other. Plus, Hamilton thought Jefferson was more of a man of character, of integrity, and believed that Jefferson was better fit for the office of president. So the Federalist legislatures in the House of Representatives followed Hamilton's lead and voted for Jefferson instead of Burr. The election of 1800 was largely based on the differing ideologies between these two major political parties. John Adams had lost the support of many Americans with the Alien and Sedition Acts, which the Democratic Republicans portrayed as a threat to civil liberties. As more people began to support Thomas Jefferson's party and the Federalists began to fracture and split from within, The nation peacefully transferred power from one party, the Federalists, to the other party, the Democratic Republicans. The nation transitioned from the more centralized government under the Federalists to the more decentralized government under the Democratic Republicans, with the states holding more power. However, the big question was, could Thomas Jefferson shift the power back to the states and the American people once he took office? John Adams' single term as president was challenging. He had to follow the highly respected, highly popular George Washington, and he faced huge opposition from the Democratic Republicans. His strategy backfired when he tried to quiet the Democratic Republicans through the Alien and Sedition Act, and he became even more unpopular because Americans feared that their individual rights were being restricted and taken away with those Alien and Sedition Acts.